part of our kōrero tonight, Horo, is talking about contemporary urbanism and activism in contemporary music making. So I'm going to ask you your whakaaro on a few things. So feel free to share, stop me, share your thoughts at any point. But one of the big things that's happened is, you know, our music is, contemporary styles of our music is everything now in terms of te reo Maori music from here in Aotearoa is from country. We get the whole gamut of genre from country through to hip hop. And these, and they're created and performed by us, by our Indigenous artists, not just here in Aotearoa, but across the world. They become an important symbol for our Indigenous identities. They've become the way that we espouse our values, the way that we critique historic colonialism and oppression, and the impact that colonisation has had on us as Indigenous people. In terms of that, as we've shifted and immersed ourselves in urban environments, we've adopted those contemporary forms as vehicles for activism and politicising our causes. What's your, you know, for things such as ihu mātau, what's your whakaaro, because you've come from very much from this tradition with your Taonga Puoro, what's your thoughts on moving Taonga Puoro from this traditional base into this contemporary music making space?
Well, when you look at the history from pre to post colonisation here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and you see within that whole time leading up to 2020 here in today's world, music has always been a very important part of our culture. It has been an embedded part of our culture through times of celebration, all the way through to times of war, of death, of all those things that we all share in humanity. And so when it comes to where we are today in this urban drift and this urban calling, this urbanized, modern, contemporary world that we're living in, one of the things I believe anyway is every Indigenous culture is able to continue to hold fast their own indigeneity through their creative arts. When oppression, when colonization, assimilation of culture has been slapping at the forefront of our people in different cultural methodologies, these Western epistemologies that have really hit our people in many forms, from religion all the way through to modernity, technology, and this whole globalization generation that we're in today. One of the things as First Nation people, one of the things as Indigenous people, one of the things that has been able to hold us together has been our cultural identity through our creative arts, through our creative practices. And so in our music, even though we have adapted and we have adapted our language into these contemporary new forms of music known as the new contemporary genres, whether we're looking at Western classical music, jazz, hip hop, heavy metal, rock, R&B, soul funk, reggae, we have been able to continue to hold the soulful power or essence of our culture through those particular genres and styles of music. My particular practice, the Taonga Puoro, was one of those musical practices of our people that were nearly lost to our culture, to our Maori culture, because of the coming of Western civilization and what they brought with them being the Bible and religious belief systems. It was told to our people that we must put our culture to the side, we must push and leave our culture to the side for us to evolve as a nation, to evolve as a people. And yet when we done that, suppression and oppression just built layers on top of layers, our land taken away from us, we had land confiscations, we had imprisonments, we had generations after generations of continued suppression. And one of the things that has really helped us get through it all is the holding on to our creative arts, our stories, our genealogies, our connection back to land, our connection back to the ocean, our connection back to our environments. And we were able to hold on to those particular cultural posts or cultural foundations through our art forms, whether they were visual, performance, or music. And through music, through the continued revitalization, the continued forms of revolution, we've been able to, as a people, revitalize, reignite, rekindle, rebirth with all those cultural responsibilities. We've been able to go through the period of decolonizing those thoughts that were pushed into us, that were murdered into our people, that were stripped and raped with our people, to our people, from these cultures from beyond the great oceans. And so music has been a very important platform for our people to hold on to those cultural identities. And yes, we are 2020, we are heading towards 2021. We've just gone through a really global impact, or how would you say it? There are many words to put into COVID-19, but a global catastrophe that has hit every single nation on our planet. And when you look at it, what has been the fires that have kept our communities together? It has been music. It has been the creative arts. And who has been the pushers or the ones that have been driving those communities and those social media platforms through that particular art? A lot of them have been our Indigenous and our Native peoples all around the world.
What's it like for you being from this really strong traditional art form and coming into this contemporary environment and having to what have been the challenges, and what do you see are has much changed? Have you seen a change in terms of value, the value proposition of what you've been able to in terms of that traditional base?
Well, I suppose one of the biggest challenges that we have in terms of the practice of traditional Maori musical instruments being Taonga Puoro. Just last year, we had the last mainstream national university, being the University of Waikato. They were the only university in New Zealand that held and that taught papers that were accredited through the NZQA, the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, for accreditation for traditional Maori musical instruments. Now, their particular CE and the school cut the papers off because they wanted to have a medical school in the university. And so they needed extra finance. So they went around the university closing off a number of papers in all the faculties. And the unfortunate thing that has come from that is a number of Maori papers or Indigenous papers were cut, and which has eventuated to a number of issues with the University of Waikato that is going through a bit of a rigmarole at the moment here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But when those papers were cut through to today, there's actually no tertiary institution, secondary school institution or education space in New Zealand that actually teaches our traditional art form of Taonga Puoro. And the only way that we can actually, the only way we're doing it at the moment is by having small gatherings of practitioners applying for funding to bring practitioners together, or on this particular medium like Zoom and Skype and other forms of online discussion platforms, we're able to get together and talk about the issues about, well, it's about time we thought about creating our foundations of creating our own native First Nation school of this particular art form. In terms of Taonga Puoro in contemporary music, it fits perfectly. That's my own viewpoint, because the ones that taught me was the late and great Dr. Hirini Melbourne, who was a prolific Indigenous songwriter here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. He was also one of the key figures in the revitalisation of our traditional Maori musical instruments, alongside with his Pākehā, his European, Scandinavian, Kiwi counterpart being Dr. Richard Nuns. They formed a relationship and a collective, a national collective known as Horomona, which brought practitioners, carvers, storytellers, musicians, artists together to form and to start rebuilding the construct of this particular art form. And it's taken a generation to get to this point, and because he was already known as a prolific Western, or you could say he was already a prolific songwriter and composer through playing the guitar and through his use of poetic words of the Maori language. He was able to switch between the traditional and the contemporary worlds.
So can I just draw on that then? So you've raised about Hirini Melbourne, you know, a renowned Maori composer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist. That, if you like, that collaboration, that lifelong work relationship with Dr. Richard Nuns, that was not embraced by a lot of purist, Maori musicians, songwriters, collaborators. What do you think? Why was that? In terms of was Hirini's vision about contemporizing? What do you, in your whakaaro, was the drivers behind that that collaboration, if you like?
Well, I think because both of them held particular skill sets that could help the revitalization and the re-emergence of our traditional Maori musical instruments. And Hirini Melbourne, being Maori, being a highly acknowledged academic Maori, as well as being acknowledged not only on an academic view, but also with his people and his First Nation tribal area of Tūhoe and other areas as well. He was well recognized. He had pathways that he could get to that Richard Nuns couldn't. And Richard Nuns, being basically Pākehā, had access to particular pathways that Hirini couldn't get to because of him being a native, him being an Indigenous person, him being a Maori. And because of the story of colonization here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the way that it was at that particular time, when they got together, I used to call them my ebony and ivory, because like the song goes, ebony and ivory live together in perfect harmony. When they worked together, they were able to not only hit particular communities within New Zealand society, but they were able to together uplift and bring together both sides of the story. And you are right in terms of what you were saying. There were many Maori people that didn't like the fact that Hirini worked with Richard Nuns, being a Pākehā, being a Pākehā musician, because of the history, where whenever a Pākehā person would come into a Maori village or come and work with Maori people, they would take the knowledge of their people and create a book and be the author of the book and take all the acknowledgement and not actually pay acknowledgement back to the iwi or the Maori or the natives that actually helped them collate and bring together the information that's within those books. And so people were quite apprehensive and they were quite cautious when Hirini did work with Richard. At the same time, there were many academics that were very wary of Richard working with Maori, and whether working with the Maori were they were telling him fibs and telling him certain things that weren't true because of our bicultural history of New Zealand, and so there was that friction from both sides. But what they were able to do is they were able to revitalize many stories from up and down the country with an array of well over 30 different traditional Maori musical instruments. And when they did it, they not only played them in the traditional format through the eyes and through the stories of Hirini, but they were also able to hit those contemporary fields of music by infusing Taonga Puoro with classical music, which was, to our people, contemporary music because it was new to our ears since the show bands and since the early 1900s. And so it was still pretty new, only two generations new to them. And because no one had really heard of Taonga Puoro in the 1970s and 1980s, everything that Taonga Puoro was doing was new. It was like a revolution of musical melody and musical percussion because no one had ever heard of some of the instruments that were coming through.
Coming back to some of the things that you said, so we've been doing this contemporary crossover for a long time. It's not that it's new. And so I think we'll go back to, you mentioned the show bands in terms of how they came from that traditional singing of songs, writing of music, and then they contemporized it by putting it on the road and traveling the world very successfully, I might add. So they were very much, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, they were very much the very first troubadours of our contemporary Māori music, if you like. And then fast forward to the 80s, when we had our very first Te Reo Māori hit, #1 hit, here from Taranaki, Delvanius Prime and the Pātea Māori Club with Puoro. That was the Puoro. That was the first Te Reo Māori song to go #1. I'm not sure if it's, what do you call it, gold, platinum, both, I'm not sure, but it is still the top waiata, Te Reo Māori waiata to this day. And that's, 1980s, come on, what's happening here? So with all this shift, has that made any difference in terms of the value proposition of Indigenous music?
That's a very awesome question, because in that in itself, there have been songs that have been written by collectives of wonderful songwriters, Delvanius included, since Puoro, and an array of wonderful New Zealand songwriters that have won awards for their own contemporary songs, have won awards in many different fields of music, that have made attempts and made wonderful attempts to create a Māori hit in this 21st century that we're living in, to pay acknowledgement to Puoro. And yet the New Zealand music industry continues to, unfortunately, put Māori music on a lower platformed level. And the reality is, the unfortunate thing where New Zealand music is and Māori music, where that sits, the majority of New Zealand's top bands, mainstream bands, contemporary bands, from reggae to soul funk to lounge, all the way through to heavy metal, a lot of them are Māori. A lot of them sing their songs and they are in person Māori. And yet when a song is sung in Māori, even by them, it is still not recognized to that same platform that Kiwi songs or white New Zealanders or mainstream New Zealand music is recognised. A wonderful example of that in terms of my practice being Taonga Puoro, the traditional Maori musical instruments, is there is no platform in New Zealand at the moment that acknowledges our traditional Maori musical instruments. Whether we are looking at the songwriting APRA Music Awards, they have a Maori award known as the Te Maioha Silver Scroll Award for the Maori Song of the Year. That is recognised only through language, but the language that Western music acknowledges being the language of the voice. The trophy itself is a traditional Maori musical instrument, a kōwauau, and yet when pieces of music have been put forward for that award, played by the kōwauau, it is not recognised. And it is recognised, our traditional instruments are recognised as a contemporary compositional instrument. And so when our Maori music has been put forward for those awards, it is not recognised because the judges only understand Western scored music or Western functional electronica music. So there's actually no space for it. And the Maori Music Award is always put at a second-rate level to that of the other Silver Scroll wonderful songs. I'm not putting down the songs from those wonderful New Zealand musicians, but you must wonder why no Maori song is ever picked for the Silver Scrolls. And some years, the Maori song has been a lot, the musicality of the songs have been the best.
How do we, from your, of course, asking you for all the answers, how do we move out of this? What do we need to do to create our own tino rangatiratanga around this? Because you talked about awards, but again, those are awards in a Western box around a fence around that.
It's always one of those challenging things because we live in the 21st century and people, like in any creative industry, want to be recognized by their peers. They want to be recognized and acknowledged by their peers in terms of this contemporary world of living that we live in. And, you know, it's a hard pathway in terms of getting Taonga Puoro recognized because I continue to hit my head against the wall. I've tried to speak to, members of APRA and a lot members of the New Zealand music industry that are the movers and the shakers in their industries. But when the conversation is put forward, just like what Auntie Rhoda was saying, the appropriation, when Hirini Melbourne and Richard Nuns created the very first Taonga Puoro album known as Te Ku Te Whē, that has been, like what she was saying, one of the most appropriated and used and abused, not acknowledged albums that have been used left, right and centre in New Zealand contemporary music, New Zealand contemporary film industry, New Zealand contemporary social media. You know, people love to use our instrument, but they wish not to acknowledge it because they only want the first 10 seconds or the last 10 seconds or 20 seconds in between, and they want certain sections, but they don't want to acknowledge it or remunerate it. And so there's a number of issues from the intellectual cultural property rights all the way through to as you said, what is a way forward? It's, well, basic communication. Like anything, yes, we are creative natives, we are indigenous peoples, but how many generations since pre-colonization or pre-assimilation of an outside peoples coming into our islands, coming into our lands, have we allowed them to come and sit down and have a kōrero to discuss with us? And yet they keep on taking generation after generation. And our people have been humble, our people have been have had a strong resilience of perseverance in working with them, because we acknowledge and we share the acknowledgement of what gifts they bring to the floor. You know, we in like 2020, you know, I can just go back last year in the New Zealand music industry. It got to the point, you know, every year in the New Zealand Music Awards, there is awards given for religious albums, Pacific albums, country albums, classical albums, you know, all these particular contemporary genres of awards, and yet there was no Maori album. You only had to. There was
chosen. How are those award categories chosen? If we look at that as an example, are they chosen by sales categories in terms of what sells? So that how, like, because I don't understand the record industry and the commercial industry. So how does that work?
Well, because of the communication with that particular industry, I stay away from it. It is a number of over the years. It has got to do with album sales, album streams, how many streams a person gets, how many views their music gets, how many sales or online sales they have. People don't really buy CDs anymore, but everybody goes to Spotify, to Bandcamp, and downloads the songs. And so there are a whole various ways of recognizing people's songs. But there are also different areas of when your music is being played live. And so each live performance, that particular artist and the songs that that artist performs gets acknowledged through particular forms of royalties, and it goes into a database of their songs being played at a number of different events. And
so is that an issue, that our music, because there's this, if you go backwards into history, there's an element of mistrust. So we're not wanting to register things because if you register them, then, you know, that's sharing, like Rhoda was talking about, our stories. We don't give out everything. We hold some things back that we don't put out into the public arena. So, but is that inhibiting us, or is it, what's your thoughts on that? Because is that inhibiting that ability to monetize that or get recognition for those taonga?
I suppose it can fit. It depends on the musician, because we have wonderful musicians like Moana and the Tribe, Moana Maniapoto, who has been making music since the 80s, and her music is still listened to today. And she was one of the ambassadors and one of the ones who broke through that contemporary modern view of contemporary Maori music with a number of her early albums with Moana and the Moa Hunters. She broke through the grounds of actually creating a video clip of the Maori language in a contemporary setting, using contemporary genres of music. And it wasn't so much for the monetization, it wasn't so much for that, but it was using the platform of music to recognize our language, using the platform of music to recognize the beauty in the way our language is spoken, the poetical use of our language. And right through from those early days through to 2020 that we're living in now, we continue to create music and play music, not specifically or not just to you know, earn a living, to be remunerated, to be able to put food on the table for our families. But we have a number of musicians. One that's really recognized not only in New Zealand but around the world today, is that I'll use as an example, is Troy Kingi. He's a multi-award winner from the Maori Music Awards right through to the New Zealand Music Awards. He was recognized with a laureate. He was recognized in so many different areas of the New Zealand creative communities. And when you look at his songs, those songs speak about the assimilation and the colonization of cultures around the world. And he also uses some of the languages within the context of his musicality and musicianship, of the use of his words, from songs like Ethiopia through to songs like his Moko song. You know, it talks about story in the most simplistic form, you know, and that's why we create music using contemporary activism through our music, is not just to make music and make a buck and talk about how beautiful a woman or a man is, or how I am so much on top of the mountain and you are way down in the valleys still waiting to ascend to reach my height. Our songs that we sing about and our notations that we form are the score sheet of our geographic landscapes.
So how important then is the awards, if we're talking about it from that point of view, perspective, is that it's all about that, it's about the story, it's about the narratives. But then on the other hand, we're talking about, but certain aspects of it are not getting recognised in the awards. So I just, you know, what's the purpose of us being in the awards?
Yep, I go back to, you know, we live in a modern contemporary world, and your average family in the communities in our society, whether we are in Taranaki, whether we are here in Kirikiriroa in the Waikato, or whether we are over in Melbourne, or you know, up in Sami land, Sweden. One thing that we love is we love music, and we love music that connects the listener to the engagement of the purpose of that song. And so when someone hears a song that has certain melody lines, you know, they get an affinity to that song and they want to listen to that song and they have an attachment to that song. When somebody hears a song being sung by a language that they're not sure of, just like Auntie Rhoda earlier spoke about, when you're hearing Indigenous music from the likes of Alaska, and they have similarities to your melody lines here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, you find a spiritual connection. And the importance of things like awards in terms of a Maori musicianship, a Maori musician or an artist that is like in my form, in my practice being our traditional instruments, is the acknowledgement brings a platform and an open platform in a contemporary world, that's saying to a person, a young person that wants to be a musician, that has picked up their first putorino, first Maori flute, and saying, where can this take me? Is there any opportunity that this can take me anywhere? I'm falling in love with it, but what can it do for me? I know where the stories are. I feel a connection culturally, but how can I take it to that next level so my family that live overseas can hear me? Yep. And so it's you use those particular platforms and being able to, let's say, be acknowledged for your album. It gives you the platform of acknowledgement in the contemporary settings. So the New Zealand music industry and the funders of music can see that your music has reached a certain platform. So you are of a professional level to be able to trust and acknowledge that the funds, the musical funds that you're applying for, will be of good use, because you have the history, you have a good platform. Your bio is your music is being played here, there, and everywhere. So if we support you in funding you for your next album, we know that it's going to be put to some good use. But if your music isn't heard, if you are given no acknowledgement, no platform, it makes it a little bit more difficult to go from marae to marae around the country, getting all the love from the elders, getting all the love from the small communities that will engage face to face, that will remunerate you through sacks of kina, through sacks of seafood and homemade bread and homemade kills and food. But in terms of getting the music out to the wider sphere, having acknowledgements like that can be an important, it's not the only road, but it can be an important pathway to use as a key to open up more opportunities to get that voice out there.
Horomona, tēnei te mihi mahana ki a koe e hua. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Can't say joining me on the couch. You're in your whare and I'm in my whare, but lovely to talk to you tonight, e hua. Take care and aroha nui ki a koe. Me tō whānau.
And just when you hear the stories of Native people around the world and Indigenous peoples around the world, when they are going and the movements of those people are going to places like Standing Rock, going to Mauna Kea in Hawaii, going to West Papua, or standing up for places like West Papua, standing up for places all over the world, whether it's here in Aotearoa like Taranaki, like Whānau Apanui, that stand up for the rights of our people. We are not only doing these through our artistic creativity of music performance because of those movements. It's actually standing up for our people. And when we say people, we are actually including each and every one of you that are listening. We have a saying here in Aotearoa that says, "Hutea te rito te harakeke, kei hia rā te ko mako eko. Whakatairangi tia rere ki uta rere ki tai, nāue ki mai he aha te mea nui I roto I tēnei ao. Māku e ki atu he tangata, he tangata, he tangata." And that particular proverb comes from the place where I'm from. One of the places is in the top of the North Island of New Zealand, or as we say, the tail of the fish. One of our many great nanny elders up there spoke those particular words at a major gathering up there. And the last part of that particular proverb says, "If you ask me, what is the greatest attribute in this world? I will say to you, it is people, it is people, it is people." And so to all of you that are listening, and to those beautiful women that you most probably hear later on or at another time, I acknowledge and respect all you mārei kura, all you beautiful wahine, for you are our mothers, our grandmothers. You are the embodiment of our wonderful Mother Earth. And I acknowledge each and every one that is listening out there. And hopefully in the future, we do get to catch up and continue these discussions in person, so you can ask all those interesting questions and we can discuss all those beautiful, interesting points. Because when we're talking about creative music and we're arguing about creative music and singing and playing creative music, it lets us know we're alive, music is alive, and music is in all. Tēnei te mihi nui ki a koe, te tuahine Emere, ngā mihi nui ki te whānau, ngā mihi nui ki tō tātou maunga tito e o Taranaki. Tēnei au, a Horomona horo e mihi kauatu ana, e mihi aroha ana ki a koutou. Tēnā tātou katoa.